Today's guest is Goldie Chan, world-renowned branding and storytelling expert with a new book out, Personal Branding for Introverts. It opens up a really interesting question for writers. Do we need a personal brand? And that's something I'm actively navigating right now, building this podcast. So our conversation felt especially relevant. We get into everything from personal branding for writers, the ways it can support your career, and how the idea of practicing in public, which I think is so interesting and cool, can open up opportunities you didn't plan for. Here we go. All right, this is the Story Series, the podcast for writers who break the rules. Goldie Chan, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always funny because people are like, why did you write about introverts? Well, I'm an introvert myself. So, of course, I have to write a book for all the introverts out there.
Reading your book, I found myself saying, oh, yeah, that's also me throughout.
Yeah.
So I can't wait to get into all that with you.
Yes.
But I thought just to kind of level the playing field for everyone listening, like up top, if I could ask you to just define what a personal brand is and how it's similar and different from the word reputation.
Yes. So that's the number one question that I always get, which is what is a personal brand versus what is reputation? And I like to define it so simply. I think reputation is the story that others tell when you are not in the room. And your personal brand is the story that you tell when you are in the room. So your personal brand is the story that you have control over.
It's about control. There's that slight
Right.
difference between the two.
Right.
Interesting. One that you're putting out there and the other people are kind of recounting in a way.
Yes, I think one is one that you have ownership over, that you have the ability to frame and change that story. And then the other one is the story that exists around you, almost like a mythos, right?
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Now, on being an introvert, I was curious,
Yes.
when in your life do you first remember hearing the word introvert? And did it have immediate relevance to you?
Yeah, I think I first heard the word introvert when I was in college, when I was like, I don't want to go to this thing. And somebody's like, are you an introvert? I'm like, that seems about right. I don't want to go to this party. And I feel uncomfortable sometimes in really busy social spaces. And I think as an adult, that introversion, and I'm an introvert who also has social anxiety, so that introversion plays itself out in really interesting ways. And I think you yourself have been in a leadership role. I think when you're an introvert also that's led groups of people or is in the place where you're leading other people, then that becomes like almost like a double whammy sometimes.
Yeah, and college is definitely, it's kind of a rude awakening for if you're an introvert,
Yes.
but undiagnosed in a way where you're like, okay, you're confronted with this whole new kind of social life. And so it's
Yes.
like now you're trying to figure out what you're comfortable
You're
with. And
figuring out who you are
yes.
in so many levels, obviously in college, not just the introversion, but
Right.
in many ways, you're figuring out who you are as a person, what you like, what you don't like. And for me, introversion and figuring out that I was an introvert was part of that journey. For me in college was figuring out like, oh, okay, maybe I'm not the person that is friends with every single person. I'm maybe not going to every single event. I'm maybe not necessarily the loudest person in the room, but how am I showing up?
Right. And so for some context, what college did you study at and what were you majoring in at the time?
Yeah, so I studied at Stanford, and I majored in biology. So I was pre-med at the time, never did anything related to medicine, but it was really good for helping me later in life, I think, be really organized with the way I think about data, the way I think about strategically doing things.
Interesting. So you studied going into college as a biology major.
Yes.
You had a certain path that you thought
Yeah,
you were going to go down at the
absolutely.
beginning. And
Yes.
then what did that look like when you were graduating?
Oh gosh, so when I graduated, I had just done a project. I remember a genetics research project. I was published, which is one of the biggest things you could do as an undergrad, especially as a biology major. And I remember having a split path. I had an offer to join an HIV research lab that was really prestigious and very obviously good work. I had an offer to be a graphic designer because I was doing a lot of graphic design at the time. at a startup. And then I took the third option, which is I actually ran a fashion brand for a couple of years because I'd started. I mean, this is, in college, right? You do 10 million things. I had started my own fashion line, and I remember running that fashion brand for a couple of years. And when it came to finding someone to help me run it as a co-founder, as somebody doing the more technical business minded side, I couldn't find somebody who was right because everybody I knew was, from Stanford studying biology. So these are not people who are necessarily business minded. They're not entrepreneurs. And when I decided to fold that business at 22, I thought, oh my gosh, my life is over. Right? Because at 22, everything is so big
Yes.
and so monumental. And you're like, this was my life's dream. This was like what I was going to do until I'm like, very old, which, in my brain, very old was like 50, right? And you're like, that's the end of it.
Yes.
Or very old is probably 30. Let's be
Right,
really real.
right.
And it was funny because at that moment, I had what I like to call a friendervention.
A friend intervention. I love that.
Right? I had a bunch of friends because I was playing a lot of Sims and I was really depressed. And so at one point, my friends came in to my place and my Sims is lying on the floor crying, just like sobbing. And I'm like, I was like, I'm fine. I'm fine. But my Sims was literally wrecked on the floor. And I thought it was so funny because I was like, obviously looking back, what a microcosm of what I was truly doing. And
Mm.
I remember eating a lot of ramen and peanut butter sandwiches during that time. And my friends did this intervention where they were like, Goldie, get a job, get any job, just, get out of the house. And the first job I ever got was in marketing. So I was like a marketing, I think assistant or associate or whatever is the lowest possible level. I don't remember exactly the title I had, but whatever is like the most junior thing you could possibly be in marketing. And that started my career in marketing and branding in a really specific way. And it's not that I necessarily sought it out. It just was the first job I had. And then I started on this like fascinating career trajectory to doing branding and marketing. And I don't know that I would have picked that out. I don't know that especially like even 18-year-old me knew that was even an option.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's so often true that you don't always know what you will respond to until you're exposed to it.
Yes.
And you're not going to pick it out necessarily if it was totally up to you.
Yes.
From a lineup of career choices.
Yes.
But in reading your book, I was struck by how you mentioned starting a boutique fashion brand.
Yeah.
You spent some time in the startup space, marketing, later on writing Archie comics, which is a really fun fact.
I still write Archie comics now.
Yes. And so I was curious and it sounds like we're zeroing in on when you found this marketing path, but if you ever felt pressured at the time to just have someone tell you, hey, pick a lane or decide on something.
Yeah.
You're majoring in biology and then you're doing this and it's like, what are you doing? And so did you feel that kind of pressure?
I think because I went to Stanford and there are people there who at 18 are like, this is exactly what I'm going to do with my life. And some of them, that's really what they did from 18, which is so young, to when they were, 30, maybe even 40, so many years down the road, they never deviated from the path, which to me is so fascinating because I zigzagged as so many of us do, right? Down the career path, down the little rabbit hole that's a career.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I do think that I felt pressure just because of the people I was surrounded by to have like an incredibly narrow focus. And for me, that was like, oh, you're going to work in marketing in tech forever because that's what everyone who takes this job, we all go down the same like, career path. Or if I was going to do biology or, medicine related things, I was going to get a job at a tech like a biotech startup,
Right.
or I was going to go to medical school, or, these very, very narrow lanes. And what I've learned, of course, as I've gotten older is so many of us are multifaceted. We do so much. Even if we have hobbies, those hobbies are not necessarily exactly the straight and narrow of what we focus on for our work.
What do you think about marketing grabbed you? Why did it kind of take hold of and become your path at that point?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first job I got, once again, was because I think I applied to like a bunch of different jobs and that was the first job I got. So that was the job I did.
Mm-hmm.
But I think as I proceeded down my marketing career and I got all the way to head of marketing, Um, I think when I was going down that path, marketing to me just makes a lot of sense because marketing to me is how are you telling the story to your customers or your consumers or your audience that resonates. So to me, marketing at its core, marketing branding is storytelling.
Mhm.
It's storytelling to a very specific audience. And I think so many of us also are in our own ways little marketers, little brand, and that's
Yeah.
why I think I wanted to write this book, Personal Branding for Introverts, because even if you don't think you have a personal brand, if you are online, you probably have a personal brand.
You have one without realizing you have one,
Yes.
and you might want to take another look if that's the one that you want to be putting out there.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Especially if you are very, say, present on Instagram, right? So many of us have Instagram accounts,
Mhm.
but we don't think really critically about what we're putting out there on Instagram. And I know people who have gotten rejected from jobs because they're not careful about what they put online because they
Mhm.
think, well, it's not related to my work. So this is just the for fun.
In that path, marketing as a useful tool for companies, of course. When did you
Yes.
make that connection to that marketing and self-promotion can be applied to oneself?
So there was a while where I worked for this one agency and I was tweeting for C-level executives for Fortune 500 companies. And the best part is they don't know that I was even, of course, the person tweeting for them because they had hired this agency. And I think this is probably terrible. I was the most junior person on the team and they were just like, Goldie, write all these tweets, right? And so I was writing these batches of tweets for these people I've never met before. And I was trying to help them advance their careers from behind the scenes through literally 100, at the time, 140 characters,
Right, right.
right? And it was so fascinating to me. That's the first time I really thought really in depth about personal branding because I remember one of these executives at this massive company um, wanted to talk constantly about this music sheet business that he, I think, was co-running with his cousin or something.
Hmm.
So he was an executive, but he had this music sheet business. So it'd be very like high level stuff he'd want to talk about. And then like 50% off sheet music today on Fridays only. And I had to, as the person writing his tweets, had to figure out how to balance it so it wasn't quite so jarring
Hmm.
to see those tweets that were suddenly like 50% off, like sheet music, blah, blah. And because they had nothing to do with his main job, but he wanted to help promote.
So you were trying to find a way to make it seem like it's within his voice or
Yes.
authentic in a way,
Yes. I
not
was
jarring, like you
not
said.
jarring. I was trying to find a way that I think about brands like their wagon wheels. So the hub, that center of that wooden wagon wheel, that's the core of our personal brand. That's what we want to go through every single thing we do. So whether we have a personal brand that applies to cooking, to a podcast, right?
Hmm.
To our day jobs, like our personal brand, our general ethos, like who we are as a person should come through all of these things. So maybe what comes through is that we are funny and relatable in all of these different areas. So it's really about your personal brand being able to be filtered through so many different things, but your center, that idea being the same.
Right, right. So you started to have these insights as you were developing voices for
Right.
others. And then at some point you start to apply it to yourself or you start to see your own personal brand. Can you talk
Yes.
about that insight into applying
Yeah.
it to yourself?
It was funny because it wasn't until many years later that this applied to me. So in 2017, I started creating videos on LinkedIn
Mhm.
and I eventually created over 800 daily consecutive
Your
videos.
daily Goldie
Yeah, my
hashtag, right?
daily goldies.
Yeah.
And it was wild to me because it was so many different videos that I made and I made probably like 95% of all those myself. So there wasn't a team editing. It was just me shooting and editing and subtitling them,
Mm.
captioning them all myself. And over the course of this, I think I discovered my personal brand because before this, I had been a really behind the scenes person. I had been working in tech or entertainment, being the director of community, director of marketing, director of social media, something, manager of social media, like all those titles, head of marketing. I wasn't, though, the face
Right.
of a lot of things. And suddenly I was the face of my own brand. And what an odd and meta thing to be that you represent yourself And suddenly I found the power of personal branding.
Mm. And what was the impetus to starting those daily videos? Why then?
Yeah, so I was in between jobs, as so many of us happen to be sometimes. So I just left a head of marketing position at a startup. And in the 1 month I took off, which I called, a sabbatical, but that's just a fancy way of saying I was not employed at the time.
Right.
I was very unemployed at the time. During that time, I was like, okay, I just don't want a gap of like me not working. So I thought, why don't during that time, I just do something. And so I had a lot of options on the table and I happened to magically get into the LinkedIn video beta. So I thought, I'm going to make these videos on LinkedIn, the most uncool platform ever. No one's going to watch them. No one. But then I'll be able to take to my next job interview. I'll be like, you know what, guys, during that time off, I was doing experimental work on like this platform and we can bring it into the bubble. Like there is a way to spin that,
Absolutely.
right?
Yes.
And so just like when you're taking that time off and you're like, I'm working on this personal project, right?
Yes.
And so that was what it was going to be for me. But after a month, I was featured by the current CEO at the time in an internal keynote of here's 8 creators doing interesting things on the
The
platform.
CEO of LinkedIn.
CEO of LinkedIn at the
Ah.
time, which was, and I only knew it because it was internal because one of my friends happened to be the editor for these videos, a freelance editor. And he's like, Goldie, did you know you're in this keynote? And I was like, I mean, I didn't because I don't have internals. So it was fascinating because I did a month. It seemed like there was some odd traction. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to take another half a month. I'm going to apply for a job because I'm going to be gainfully employed. And then that 1 month became 3 months. That 3 months became 6 months. That 6 months became a year. That year became 2 years. And I think about all that time. And during that time, I started writing for Forbes. Like they reached out to me and were like, would you like to do a column? I started working with all these amazing brands. So I still to this day am an Adobe ambassador, which
Mhm.
I'm very thankful for. They're such a cool brand. They're one of my dream brands to work with. I got like a commercial with Microsoft. Like all of these things happened that would have never happened if I didn't have a very public personal brand on what I still like to say is the most uncool platform ever, LinkedIn. And I also got this hilarious nickname, the Oprah of LinkedIn.
Yes, that's
Yes.
right. And that's relevant because as you mentioned in your book, she's a very famous introvert, right?
Right. Right. And I think that people think of her as an extrovert because she's so present and on camera. But I think that there are so many introverts out there who are wonderful public speakers,
Mm.
who are making their own wonderful podcasts, right? Who are, of course, great writers because introverts love to write.
Yes.
But I think that there are many public facing introverts who are then also leaders.
That's so that's a great insight. And just going back to the beginning of the Daily Goldie videos. So I
Yes.
just love that it was in between jobs and you don't know what's going to come next, but you're trying to find ways to stay productive, keep yourself busy. It's like the writer working on a personal pilot,
Yes.
just to sharpen their skills, to have
Yes.
something to show. So it kind of started on a whim like that of just you want to stay focused and productive on your own if no one's going to give you a job at the moment, right?
Right. I wanted to stay productive during that time.
Mm,
And I also wanted to be able to come back with a project. Like to me, it was
mm,
going to be honestly probably, I thought at the time like 5 videos. I thought I
right.
was going to do 5 videos, but be able to come back and say, in a month, I made 5 videos, which still sounds impressive. And yes, just like a writer is working on their pilots or working on some spec work or
Hmm.
whatever it is, I thought, I will create some videos. So then when I go back to my head of marketing position at whatever startup, I'm sure I would be like, okay, great. Let's get our video team on this because I've been experimenting with this. So here's some proof of concept. Let's go. And I would have something interesting to talk about
Yeah.
also in interviews for jobs because I wouldn't be like, well, I spent the last month depressed,
Right, right,
which
right.
let's be real, it happens to the best of us. And I think like, I I think that being able to go back and saying, "I spent the last month productive, and I spent the last month interested and engaged," is
Mm.
such a better way of coming back into a job interview.
Yeah, yeah. And what were you talking about early on?
So I was talking about pop culture branding and marketing. So I literally would go to a place like Universal Studios or I would go to Disneyland and I would talk about here's here's the history of the Simpsons, right? And here's like some bullet points you may not know about the history of the Simpsons. Or I'd go to ride the train and I'd be like, here's the history of trains in America, or here's the history of those like paste on posters that you see on walls, that you see on like, whenever you see a building that's boarded up, you see those paste on posters.
Hmm.
Here's the history of that in America. So I was doing a lot of pop culture branding and marketing in America. And
Mm.
I think that that really caught people's attention because no one else was doing this kind of content on LinkedIn. Everybody else's content was like, here's me inside on a dry erase board being like, here's 5 ways you could blah, blah, blah,
Right.
like this.
And you're riding a train.
And
You're
I'm
at
riding
like
a train. I'm
university.
like doing stuff. And they weren't, of course, perfect videos because once again, I was doing this without a gimbal, without like anything proper. I just
Yeah.
had my phone at the time. It was an iPhone 5S. It was not a
Right.
great phone, but it was a phone that could shoot video.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how to edit because I learned along the way. So shout out to iMovie.
Nice.
I learned eventually how to edit in iMovie, and now I edit completely on my phone. But at the time I was just like, okay, so I know how to like literally clip the front and the end of the video. So that's the only editing I would do is
Mhm.
like clip those and then immediately upload them. No color correction whatsoever, like nothing. And those were the first videos I was doing, and they would get 10 views, and I'd get so excited because it'd be like 10 whole views.
Right.
10 whole views. And
Yes.
there'd be like 3 people who liked my videos, and I'd be like 3 people I don't even know. That's so
Yes.
exciting.
Yes, that's huge. And it was beta at the time, so LinkedIn video was not even really a thing.
It wasn't even available widely to people. And I remember I got my first hate comment, and my friend printed out a t-shirt for me. And this hate comment is like a paragraph. It's but it's funny. It's like, why are you making these videos on this platform? You should make making these videos on Facebook. Facebook is the right platform for these kind of videos. And which is funny to think because Facebook video, nobody even thinks about Facebook video anymore. No. But
No.
in 2017, that was, I would say, more of a real thing than LinkedIn videos were.
Right.
So they were like, get off this platform and get on Facebook. And I love that that was like, for sure, an older person was yelling at me to get on Facebook, which is
Probably
so
someone from
funny.
Facebook too.
Yeah, somebody from Facebook. And she was like so upset. So it was like 3 sentences of her talking about how I should be on Facebook instead of LinkedIn. And I just wrote back, thank you for this opinion, like, and my friend screenshot that and like put on a t-shirt for me. But I think back on that time, and I think there's something to be said also about being really experimental.
Mm.
And because I didn't think I would blow up, I didn't think this would be a career-changing move for me, it was so easy to mess up because I just was like, okay, well, I will take this back to my next job interview and be like, look at all these mess ups and flubs I made with this. Great. And when we're thinking about our grand strategy with our massive budget, let's think about this, this, and this.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it starts to take off roughly after a month, and then in 2 months it leads to more. Do you start to feel pressure to change your approach when you're getting more views at that early stage?
I think it was really after like the 3 to 4 month mark that I was like, oh, maybe I should try new stuff. Maybe I should try different things. Because at that point I was like, oh, am I just in it? And I found myself non-strategically suddenly in it. Like I could go to 100 videos, which I hit. I could go to 1 year videos, which I hit. But like the leap from 100 to 365 is a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot more than from 1 to 10.
Yes.
Yeah. But I will
Yes.
say the leap from 1 to 30 is a lot too.
Yeah, because you're making all your first mistakes at
Yeah,
that point.
you're making all
learning
your
the
first mistakes
platform.
and you're like, I don't want to do it today,
Right.
And I did it, I did it on weekends too, every single day. So there was literally not a single day I skipped in that entire 2-year period. I had a video out every single day until I stopped. And when I stopped, I stopped. I stopped, and I've only recently started picking it up again. But I continued for this entire period of time, and I was traveling. So I'd literally have I remember I had one video where the lengthier edited video didn't upload. So I had a video of me just like running onto the airplanes. It was like this like terrible 15-second video of me like running and be like, guys, I'm trying to upload a video. Okay, thank you. And I uploaded that video.
Wow.
Yeah. And
Wow.
it uploaded because the Wi-Fi was terrible because
Yeah.
I was in an airport. Right. And I remember that being like such a sign of like, I'm going to do this no matter what. And in some ways that taught me a lot about resilience and about like sticking to something and being really present with a project that I was working on. Because in the past, all of the other projects and things I'd worked on were in-house. they were serving like a different brand. Um, so I was at a couple of jobs before I was at Legendary, and I had been working on like Nerdist and Sundry and all these other nerd brands as their
Mm,
director of social media and community. And I remember when I was in that job, all of the content, of course, we were doing was all serving like the greater, Legendary brand and all of these like sub brands underneath it. So if we're promoting a movie, that's like to help that thing.
right.
And it was fascinating to be suddenly like, "Oh, I'm, like, promoting me." What a weird difference.
But so much had happened since the very first video. Obviously,
Yes.
so many different kinds of companies reached out to you to be a contributing writer. You
Yeah.
mentioned Forbes, all
Yeah.
these other
It had opened all these doors for me
right.
that I didn't even know were possible, if I'm totally honest. So in 2017, when I started, I didn't even know that it was going to be possible for me to have my own column in Forbes, right? And I didn't know it was even possible for me to be in a commercial. Like, I didn't even know it was possible for me to be an Adobe ambassador. I didn't know all of these things were even possible because also I think in 2017, at least from my understanding, because I wasn't so deep into the influencer universe, that you could do all of these things. You could be an ambassador, you could represent these things, you could be a working writer.
Mm, right, right. And especially LinkedIn too, which I think might be my favorite because
Mm,
I feel like it's just at a glance, it's more introvert friendly because
yeah.
there's a clear boundary of work and there's not as much personal life. So
Yeah.
for me, I just kind of gravitate towards LinkedIn more.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you found something that you wanted to communicate, a part of yourself that you were comfortable putting out there.
Yes.
And that boundary kind of stayed pretty true for those videos, for those set of
Yeah.
videos.
And I would say, like, over the course of the 800 videos, I moved a little bit away from pop culture branding and marketing and more towards like, especially when I'm like, oh, here I'm traveling. So here's just like interesting, like fun fact or a question for you. This like thinking about your like life and career and branding. And so
Mm.
like I kind of expanded more towards that general, just bigger bucket of I would say video types.
And you mentioned this was roughly around 2017.
Yeah, 2017 to 2019. So this is like right before
Yeah.
COVID. Yeah.
Right before COVID. And the original idea for your book came in around the same time, 2018.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you know that you wanted to speak to introverts? Was that there from the
I
beginning?
definitely wanted to do personal branding, and I was fingers crossed going to do it for introverts. And I had so many people who tried to dissuade me from doing a book about introverts, right? They're like, "Why don't you do a book about personal branding for introverts and extroverts?" And I thought,
So for everyone.
that's for everyone. Why would I even write a book like that?
Right, right,
Right?
right.
And I was like, I don't mind doing like this book is personal branding for introverts and the next book is personal branding for extroverts, which I personally don't think I will do,
The
if
personal
I'm
brand
totally honest.
trilogy, and then
Yeah,
for
and
everyone in
I'm not
between. And
I don't think I'm going to do that. But I just said like I really want to do a book for introverts because I feel like all the books for introverts out there, they all start with the word quiet, right? Or Susan Cain has a really wonderful book out there called Quiet, and it's what
yes.
so many introverts and introvert books reference for good reason. But I thought, what if we had a book that didn't have quiet in the title, and it wasn't about being quiet. It was about being you and how you can not necessarily stand out, but how you can build your brand that gets you ahead in your career
Mm.
in a very specific way. And it's not about becoming an extrovert. It's not about fighting against your type. It's about finding ways that work with your energy instead of against it.
You bring up that it's the goal is not to try to make you more extroverted. Like
No.
and that's the common pressure that a lot of introverts
Yes.
feel. And so I just think you do a great job
Thank
of
you.
just championing introverts and using a perceived weakness, but really owning it and making it a
Yeah,
strength.
I don't think that being an introvert is a weakness at all. Once
Right.
again, there are so many successful introverts out there, so many famous introverts out there. And I think that it's helpful to think about introversion as that's just you, that's
Mm.
just how you relate to the world. So, how can you better relate to the world in a way that will help your career?
I was struck by how often I was like, "Oh yeah, that's also me."
Yes.
Like just even thinking back to like my first job in production on a TV show,
Mhm.
so it was Stretch Armstrong, and I was
Fun.
like essentially the writer's assistant,
Right.
production coordinator. So I'm like
You're
everywhere
everywhere.
all throughout the
You're
day.
busy.
And I loved eating lunch by myself.
Yes.
That was like the reset time. That was the recharge.
Yeah.
And even today, I would much rather go to lunch with one person than five. If it's like the
Yes.
five of us are going, I'm like, no way. Like,
Yes.
and also like, no. Like that's
Yes.
not, and so, and you point out there is a spectrum of introverts and extroverts. It's
Yeah.
not black and white, but like where I was leaning towards reading the books was, oh yeah, that's also, yep. Like that's the introverted side. And so I think just even having a podcast where it's just one-on-one is an extension of
And
that.
that's why I think introverts do great at podcasts. I think introverts, once again, do great at writing, right?
Mhm.
That's why there's so many introverted writers on Substack or on
Right.
these RMP
Yes.
Hive, on all these other platforms,
Yes.
because that suits introverts. And that's why I have an entire chapter called The Internet is for Introverts.
Yeah.
And I really believe that. So I think what's powerful, for example, about, just to be very meta about podcasts, is that an introvert can do this where either it's just you by yourself or you with a host or you with a guest.
Mm.
And then you can reach a broader audience. But
Mm.
it's not necessarily scary, like it's not you talking directly to 500 people if that feels uncomfortable, but you can reach that audience of 500 people. And that is very powerful.
Yeah, I think there's a introverts make for better listeners too.
Yes.
Like I think that's
absolutely.
just, and that's part of podcasting and just, or even just conversing in general. It's just
Yes.
listening to what the person,
I
not
think
just waiting to
introverts,
speak.
yes, I think introverts, that's one of the introvert superpowers, is being a really great listener.
Mm.
And I want to say, it's so funny you talked about sitting by yourself and eating lunch by yourself. I remember I was filming something in Toronto. I was filming a course in Toronto, and they were on these giant sound stages. And I just said, I am like exhausted right now, guys. And the whole crew is there, everybody's there filming, and I was the talent. And I was just like, I know what's going to happen. We're going to break for lunch, and then everybody's going to come and talk to me and be like, hey, Goldie, blah, blah, blah. And they're going to do it very kindly, right? They're going to want to talk to me. They're going to want to make small talk. And I was like, I absolutely have no energy to do this because we're doing like 8-hour days where I'm talking constantly and I have to be on
Mm.
and I have to be present in camera. Because if you've ever worked with live action, you'll know like or just even people who do voice reading, like if they're not on, you sense it. Like the camera picks that up. And I want to do the best possible job. So I'm just like, okay, guys, I'm going to sit. Can you just like set aside a separate space? And I'm going to sit there with my headphones in. I'm going to listen to music and I'm going to not talk for an hour or half an hour or however long lunch is, so I can recharge. So then I can come back and be on again.
Mm.
And it's not that I don't want to do small talk. It's not that I don't enjoy everybody on set, but it's just like, if I do that small talk, even for half an hour, it's going to drain my battery by so much.
Yeah.
And then when I get back on camera, I know I'm not going to do as good of a job. And that makes everybody's lives harder, right? It makes the director's lives hard. It makes like what we're all here to do is to capture me talking on camera. I will then want to do the best possible version of that.
Mm. I love that because you're setting a boundary.
Yes.
And that's something that was recurring in the book was
Yes.
setting your own boundaries.
Yes.
And it's something that you need to do. And reading it, it becomes apparent that, okay, this is something, if this is resonating with me, this is something I should work in.
Yes.
But it's one of those things where before you read it or before you're like confronted with it, you might think you need it, but you're not sure what you need. And you
Yes.
just push yourself. And as you described, you get burnt out. And then you get that like emotional hangover or whatever it is from being just overstimulated. And so, but it was just the boundaries kept coming up in the book for me of like, oh, it's really important, but you need to know what you need.
But you need to know where your boundaries should be.
Yeah.
And that requires a little bit of introspection.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. And so I just really appreciated that in the book as well of like, oh yeah, because sometimes you don't always know what you need until it's like there in front of you. You go, oh yeah,
and you're like,
I want to incorporate that
I
now.
also think sometimes you don't know what you need until you're there and you're like, I don't like this. Like if you're sitting at lunch, imagine this, and you have to talk to 30 people.
Yeah.
But then right after lunch, you have to be very present and on, right? Like leading a meeting, or for me being on camera, or like doing something where it requires even more of your energy.
Mm-hmm.
Then okay, in the future, I don't want to do this.
Yeah. And so at what point in the book's journey do you put your foot down and say, no, I am going to talk to introverts?
Gosh. So to me, it was really around 2020, 2021 when I pitched it to this other publisher that they no longer exist anymore. They folded, which is unfortunate. So it was the first publisher that picked up my book. They're a great business imprint that doesn't exist. And I just said, I really want this to be an introvert book. And we talked back and forth about it a bunch of times. And that's when it really became an introvert book. And then it's funny because then that place folded. And then when I took it to the next publisher, they were like, is this really the book you want to write? And that was like a time at which I could have changed my mind. I could have, and I decided, no, this is the book. This
Yeah.
is the book I want to write.
And why was it so important to you? Did you feel like you saw space for it that didn't
Yeah.
exist?
I
Yeah.
think that there's space for a book for introverts that feels like a conversation instead of a lecture.
Mm.
Because I think this is not anything to do with being an introvert. I just don't like being lectured. The kind of business books you read where you feel like they're telling me it's 3 chapters about why I'm wrong, right?
Right.
And why
Yeah.
everything in my life is wrong, everything I do is wrong, and then 7 chapters of like, here's how you have to fix it. You have to do
Mhm.
exactly this incredibly rigid way of doing it. And I wanted to write a book that was a conversation. It's not that you're doing things wrong, right? It's not that you have to fix anything. It's just that is this not working for you? Is this not helping you get to your goals?
Mm.
Okay, here's literally 20 different ways to try. And that I hope some of these ways resonate with you.
Mm.
So that way you can get to where you want to go, what your big goals are. And specifically, of course, I wrote this for careers. So like where your career goals are.
Mm.
And like, I hope some of these tactics resonate and you go, I can do this tomorrow.
Yes.
And there's a lot of I can do this tomorrow in this book.
Yeah. Yeah. You do include exercises throughout.
Right.
Right. What did you learn or discover about yourself writing this book?
I think when I wrote this book, originally I was like, okay, here's like I think it's funny because I think I maybe started writing the book as like, here's the 5 things you absolutely have to.
Yeah.
And I think as I wrote the book more and more, and I was pulling out stories for myself and being very vulnerable about those stories, I think it was really helpful for me to be like, oh, that's when the tone became more conversational. That's when I learned what I really want to share about me should always be lessons that are helpful for other people or just be really relatable. Like one of the stories I share in the book is that I was stuck in in the tube in London, and that was very uncomfortable for me. And I didn't want to ask for help because I'm an introvert and stuff. And help came, and I'm very grateful for that help. But I think that hopefully that's a relatable story because so many introverts are stuck in places where they don't feel comfortable asking for help.
Mm.
And then help sometimes comes, but also how can we advocate for ourselves? Like what were other things that maybe I could have done in that time?
Right. Right. And it was also refreshing to hear times where you were about to speak in front of thousands of people and you had a panic attack ahead of time
Yes.
and you still went on and did it. And so it's like,
Still did it.
it doesn't mean that it's preventing you from doing this, or being an introvert means you can't also do this,
Right.
but it's like, here's the realities. And so
Right.
just call it out. And here's some things maybe you can set up for yourself in advance so you can get ahead of it as opposed to react to it. Right.
Yes, exactly. So I think it's a lot of being proactive. I
Mm.
think where introverts can shine is being really proactive about their lives and thinking, okay, I know that this will exhaust me, right? I know this will overwhelm me, or I know that I don't like this. And then that's where boundaries come in. And then we set our boundaries early. So that way we don't get to the point where we're just like curled up in a ball in a corner of a party, which I've been there before.
Right. Right. Right.
I've been there hiding in the bathroom.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
hiding in the kitchen. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Curious, like for the up and coming writers, for the young professionals, is there such a thing as starting a personal brand too early?
No, I
No.
think that you can always be starting a personal brand at any point in time because once again, if you have a presence online, you probably have the inklings of a personal brand, whether you know it or not. So I think if you can position yourself to say, be somebody that if you're writing in fantasy, that you are thinking and messaging and reading and talking to people who are in literally the fantasy world, that's a helpful thing to do. I meet other comic book writers because I write for Archie, and when I meet them and I see their whole feed is on comic books, like actually a better example, I met somebody, he's an artist, and his whole feed 24/7 is about like the tops cards that he draws. It's about the comic book covers that he draws because he draws for like Marvel and DC, like all the major ones. He like shows his behind the scenes. Like
Mm.
when I go to his socials, I know right away that he is a comic book artist. And then when he goes to comic book conventions, which he does a lot, he's like, here's my 25 comic book artist friends. We're all at this convention together. And I love the way he does this. It's so smart because, once again, all of his socials tell one story. He is a comic book artist. So when people reach out to him, they know exactly what he does, they know exactly what his
Mm.
work is. And when his fans, his audience want to find him, they look at his socials and they're like, "Oh, this is him because here's his cover he did, right?
Right.
Here's the card he did for Tops, right?" They
Yeah.
know exactly who he is because his story is really streamlined, and he keeps telling the same story, the same personal brand story
Yeah.
over and over. So his reputation matches his story.
Yeah. And what about to the up and comers who don't feel that they have a story yet,
Right.
or they don't know which part of themselves to share?
So I think with that, I think it's helpful to take away before you begin, right? So once again, I've known people who literally have not gotten jobs because they show pictures of them like partying all the time,
Yeah.
inappropriately. And like when that doesn't match, unless you're like literally a party influencer or something, when
Right.
that
Right.
doesn't match like
Yeah.
what the kind of job that you want to get, I think that becomes really difficult.
Mm.
So I think taking away is sometimes better than adding to. So like focusing down on like, well, I want to be known as a writer. Maybe I can share more of my writing journey. Or if you're especially a starting writer, an aspiring writer, sharing like, this is the writing class I'm in, right?
Mm.
Here's the writing group I'm in.
Mm-hmm.
Here is the book that I'm reading about writing. All of these things are indicators that you are serious about your craft.
Yeah.
I met an actor recently, and I briefly did acting, and I'm very thankful I no longer act. But I'll just say that. But I met this actor, and when I was acting, I was in classes all the time. I was in workshops all the time. I was constantly learning, right?
Mm.
And I met this actor, and they were like, "Well, I don't need that. I'm just going to get these roles and I don't need to act." And I think about all these A-list, B-list, C-list actors, they are still in classes, right? They're still in workshops. They still are being trained because acting, like writing, is a muscle that you need
Yeah.
to constantly be doing. And just like, and once again, just like acting, if you aren't acting in classes, if you aren't acting in workshops, if you aren't acting and practicing, you lose that muscle. Same with writing. If I meet a writer who's like, "I'm a writer," and they're like, "But I haven't written anything in years." And that's not even talking about paid writing. If you're a writer, you need to be writing.
Yeah. I would be skeptical of anyone who says they don't need to learn or take classes. I'll just get it
Right.
based on my skill level. It's
Or
like,
they're not, and especially as a writer, if you're not reading.
yes. Well, and it's just part of the love. Like you just want to take
Yes.
in. It's not even considered work per se. It's like I
No.
just want to,
You
fuel
want
my
to take that
creativity.
in, and you want to see what other people are writing. You want to
Yes.
read constantly. Like I read a
Yes.
ton of graphic novels, a ton of comics because that's the medium I love.
Yeah.
Outside of business and branding. So I like have two kind of very different spheres.
Yes.
And I read a lot of business books, right? I just read a great one called Tiny Experiments. That's like delightful.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like I've seen the cover in my head. Like I've seen that around.
Yeah. And it's
Yeah.
great. There's another one also, as tiny in the title. I think I really like the word tiny, called Tiny Habits. Also, such a great book. And I think you have to be excited about the work that other people are doing in your sphere, or like
Mm.
what you want to focus in on. So if you want to write for, I'll be honest, like I always think like if you want to be writing for half-hour dramas, or clearly I don't write in this world, but like if you want to write for that, then you should be watching dramas. Like you should be reading those scripts. You should be doing that work.
Mhm.
So since I write comics, I want to be in, it's not I'm doing this for work. I just love comics.
Mhm.
And I can write for Archie because I've read Archie comics since I was little.
Mm.
And I know that IP like the back of my hand, not because I've researched it, in a like very clinical, analytical way. I've just loved Archie comics for most of my life.
Mm. Wow. So yeah, and that excitement is contagious. Excitement gets other
Yes.
people interested in
And
what you're doing
people
too.
can tell, right? When you have done that research to be like, I write for this and therefore, and I know all this backstory. I've researched all this. Like, I'm excited about this. I can tell you the episode of this, or I can tell you the comic book that had this. Like,
Right.
people trust you. And I think trust is so important.
So that's really interesting because we're emphasizing that excitement and passion above skill level. And I'm just thinking of like the up and comers who are learning and taking
Yeah,
in.
because also when you're an up and comer,
Right.
your skill you probably haven't written like 20
Right.
books, right? You
Yes.
haven't written a ton of things, but your enthusiasm and that
Yeah.
willingness to learn is so powerful because you know what you have on your hand? Time.
Yeah.
So
So
you should use that time effectively.
and in a sense documenting your learning, which is of course
Yes.
interesting to other people because you'll find
Yes.
people like you who are in a similar scenario or will be. And it's like, oh, if he's excited about
Yeah.
that book or if she's doing this, I might like that too.
And I think social media these days is so powerful because,
Mm,
for example, I think about this one poet and he was just posting his poetry online and not to gain an audience necessarily and not to become famous, which he later did. And his books are now best selling books, right? Books of his
mm,
poetry. He did it because he said, I'm practicing. I'm practicing my poetry and I'm practicing it publicly.
mm,
And so he practiced poetry until he became a poet.
mm.
And he practiced it very publicly until he became the thing that he said he was, right? And
Interesting.
I think that as writers, we can practice more publicly, we can show our learnings more publicly. We can be like, here's the 3 books I'm reading more publicly, or here's the show that I'm inspired by, and here's the reason why.
Yeah, it goes back to that experimentation that you
Yes.
talked about, which changed the trajectory of your life and career.
Yes.
Huh. Huh. Okay. And so then now back to that up and comer who's looking at the landscape of
Right.
LinkedIn, Instagram, Shorts, Reels. You could
So
text,
many
you could post
places.
pictures, videos.
Yeah.
Right. Where does one start?
So I think it's always easiest to start with one. So I
Mm,
think starting with one platform keeps you from feeling overwhelmed. And I think you decide on that one platform by figuring out, first of all, who is the audience that you want to speak to?
mm,
Do they live on that platform? Because if your audience that you want to approach doesn't live on that platform, for example, like you're a poet, maybe, and you want to speak to other poets, what platform are they on?
right.
Right?
Yeah.
And you want to find your poetry community, you should know what platform they're on. And that I think eliminates a lot of platforms, right? Because maybe they aren't on Pinterest. So maybe we don't do Pinterest,
Right.
right?
Right. Right.
And maybe
Yeah.
they aren't on TikTok. So maybe you aren't on TikTok. I think that's one of the simplest ways to figure out which platforms to start first. The other flip side of that is also how do you like to communicate with the world? I love writing and I love videos. So I love platforms that actually allow me to do both, right? So I like LinkedIn because I've been able to do both on that platform. And in some ways, I do enjoy Instagram because it lets me do reels in a
Mm,
specific way, but I can't write the same way I like to write. So right now I'm interested in threads because on threads I can do writing
mm,
because I love to write. Because the
yeah.
whole point of being a writer is that hopefully you love words and you love creating words using your,
Mm.
I know, wild to think, using your brain instead of AI, you know? And so I think it's helpful to be on platforms where you can write as a
Yes.
writer.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's fantastic. And also like where are you spending most of your time? Just when you're looking
Yeah.
at
Also,
what do you want to contribute to which platform, it's like what are you taking in?
if you hate a platform and you have to force yourself to be on that platform, you are just not going to be successful on that platform unless you have a ton of money just to throw at it, right?
Right,
And
right.
if you're starting out, you probably don't have that kind of resource. So you probably are starting out with, once again, time
Time.
as your resource. And if time is your resource, which when you get further and further in your career, as you know, time becomes a very valuable resource. It becomes so much harder to spend time.
Mm,
But when you're starting out, you have time. So if you have time, then spend that time researching,
yes.
collecting, right?
Yes.
Absorbing.
So now that and for a while now you've been so out there
Right.
publicly,
Right.
how important is saying no?
Yeah, saying no, I think, is incredibly important. I think so many of us grow up saying yes to a lot of things that make us uncomfortable because we don't want to hurt people's feelings, or we
Mm,
don't want to, we don't want to miss out on opportunities. FOMO is so real, right? Fear of missing out. But I think that saying no opens the doors to the right opportunities,
mm,
because you can be stuck, I think, in like the bottom level forever, saying yes to a million tiny things, or you can start to say no to some of those things, and that helps you elevate to the next level. I think at a certain point, you need to start saying no.
yeah.
You need to start saying no, or you will never grow in your career.
Mm. And how do you see your own personal brand evolving over the next few years? Where do you want to go? How do you want to grow?
Yeah. So I've been thinking a lot about 2026 and like what I want to do in the new year. And for me, I have a pretty large social media presence. And one of the things that I'm really excited about is thinking, once again, how to build community out of that presence. So
Mm,
I'm really, really excited about community myself for my brand for 2026, and being really thoughtful and strategic about the community that I build and the people that I talk to,
mm,
and even the events that I speak at. Like, where do I want to speak? What audiences do I want to speak to? To me, I'm almost reevaluating. I'm doing the beginning stage again of thinking, who am I talking to?
mm,
And I think it's healthy and helpful to do this, even if you've had your career for a while, is to sometimes take a step back and be like, am I speaking to the right people? Am I addressing the right people with my personal brand? If I'm not, and maybe that right people also changes over time.
That's interesting. It sounds like you're taking inventory
Yeah.
and just reevaluating, that's really interesting. And is that something that came up as a result of writing the book, or just kind of putting your own life and career into a story that other people can learn from, caused
Yes.
you to like now look at your own future a
Well,
little bit
I'll say
differently?
this. I think what really helped is, so I guested on, at this point, over 50 podcasts this year, which is so many podcasts, right? And
Thank you, by the way,
no, of
for
course, yeah, I'm
51.
so glad to be 51 on here. But I've guested on so many podcasts, and I've in my life I've never guested on that many podcasts. Like, I think in my life, and then also in a year,
In one
in
year.
1 year, and especially that was, I think, 3-month period that I really did most of those 50.
Right.
And doing so many podcasts, what I love about podcasts is their conversations
Mm,
between people.
mm,
And it really opened the door for me to really think introspectively myself about where my career is, where I want to go. And I think having so many delightful one-on-one conversations really got me to thinking, right? Where I want my career to be in the new year. And I'd already been thinking about it, honestly, at the beginning of this year, but it really opened that door, because every fifth podcast is like, what are your goals for the next 5 years? And I'm like, I have no idea. I have no idea. For the next 5 years, I could not tell you, but I
mm,
could tell you what I'm hoping for in the next year. And I think because I got asked that question so much, it's really gotten me to not do a formulaic answer, to take a step back and say, really, no, what do I want
mm,
in the next year? And I want to be really thoughtful when I answer questions. I want to be really thoughtful when people ask me, that I give an actual real answer,
mm.
not just I'm regurgitating the same answer over and over again.
As we come to a close,
Yeah.
I like to ask everybody, um, what is a rule in your industry that you break? Some
Mm.
commonly held belief that you think people should just throw out.
Okay, this is gonna be so unpopular. So I was in a private call with like 100 people earlier today, which is wild to think about. And one thing that they're like, everybody in this room has a marketing funnel. Everybody has, and for if you're not in the marketing world, that just means like, okay, so you have your leads, people you will hope to convert into like paid whatever. And then it goes down this funnel, right? Just like a traditional funnel. And that person becomes like, oh, your client, or like somebody you work with, right? An unpopular opinion is, I have no good marketing funnel. I have great one-on-one conversations with people.
Hmm.
My marketing funnel is a direct line. It is a direct line from interest to me. And so it's not just a 500 people that I'm like, oh, I'm throwing this out there and I'm hoping they bite, right? It is really just, oh, I find you interesting. I find this person interesting, or they find me interesting.
Hmm.
And we start a conversation.
And that goes back to authenticity.
Yes.
So you don't have a marketing funnel.
I don't have a marketing funnel. I am the funnel.
You are the funnel.
For better or for worse. For better or for worse. That's the one giant rule in my industry that I break, is that I don't have that massively structured marketing funnel. I have me, and I have the realness of me.
I think that is a fantastic way to end this conversation. Goldie, this was such a pleasure meeting you. And thank you for writing this book. And I loved reading it, and I encourage everyone to do the same. This was just such a delightful conversation, so thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, before you go, thank you for listening. If you want more episodes like this, make sure to hit that follow or subscribe button. And while you're at it, grab my free guide, The Rule Breaker's Guide to Finding Your Creative Voice. It's a brutally honest roadmap I put together, built from the lessons, mistakes, and breakthroughs I've collected along my journey as a writer. You can download it for free at storyseriespodcast.com. See you in the next one.